morning, everybody, and welcome to Coffee with Craig. This is where we talk about everything firearms related, politics, culture, movies, you name it, trying to bring to it a little bit of what I like to call uncommon sense, because as we all know, what's being perpetuated out there is more like common nonsense. We're going to get you there, and hopefully we'll be able to get some folks there who are actually open and interested in listening and being a part of the dialogue. I'm not saying you got to agree with me 100% of the time, but you should agree with me 100% of the time. At least that's what I tell my wife. It hasn't worked out for me so far, but I'm still working on it. Anyway, please remember to like and share this video feed, whether it be on Facebook or on YouTube. We're working to try and increase our audience so that we can help impact whatever state it is, or the federal government, or when it comes to advocating for your right to keep and bear arms. Now, speaking of the right to keep and bear arms, as we all know, last weekend there was weekend before last there was a march. It was a march for our lives, and this has increased brought about an increased interest in young people being engaged and involved in the discussion relating to the Second Amendment and gun violence. And it's almost as if the mainstream media, CNN, MSNBC, all of these folks are utilizing young people in order to have a discussion about gun violence, and then at the same time not allowing anybody, any adult or anybody who knows what they're talking about, to actually be a part of that conversation. And what they realize is that these kids don't know what they're talking about, just like many of the adults who espouse the same stuff don't know what they're talking about. But they realize that there are a lot more adults who know what they're talking about on our side. And they're doing everything possible to try and shut us up. And even youth who try to communicate on these issues, they try to shut down. But CNN actually had a panel that they had put together to talk about. Originally, it was just to talk about gun violence, and somehow the conversation devolved into a conversation about guns and race.
We brought together a group of teenagers from Florida, Virginia, Arizona, and Pennsylvania to discuss gun violence. But the conversation quickly veered into a heated debate on the connection of guns and race.
Race affects the way that people live, they eat, where they go to school, and all of this there are factors in violence and inner city violence. With those students who were at the march, we're talking about from Baltimore, from Chicago, until we want to talk about the root causes, the conversation will never be complete, and we won't get to the bottom of it.
Chicago and Baltimore, to my recollection, have some of the strictest gun laws in the country.
See, so first of all, we'll start off with a really interesting understanding. I happen to agree with her on one point. Until we talk about root causes, what are the root causes of gun violence? We'll never really solve the problem. And the biggest challenge, and I think a lot of this conversation had to do with the fact that they wanted to point to, or not necessarily this conversation, but the conversation in general, is that they want to say that gun control is the answer. And access to firearms is not. You look at places like Brazil, where they have very strict gun laws, and yet it's the murder capital of the world. You take inner city Chicago, where it's so bad. They have very strict gun laws in the city of Chicago, and yet the gun violence there is so bad that naval medics go there for training, because it's the one place in the United States that most closely resembles a battlefield training and battlefield environment. And these are the things that, once again, they don't want to talk, they don't want to have, they don't want to really have a conversation about, as well as some other things they don't really want to talk about.
Why don't you want to have good guys with guns to protect you from criminals that are getting their weapons illegally?
Who is carrying out these mass shootings?
Okay,
young white men. And
now you're a racist. Why are you attacking white people?
That's the statistic.
It's just a fact.
Yeah, it's a fact, right? First of all, I don't know where they're getting this from, but first of all, understand that when you talk about mass shootings, first of all, understand that in general, a mass shooting is considered any shooting where 4 or more people are shot. But let's take a look at some of the more high profile mass shootings that have taken place. Let's say, how about the DC snipers? Were they white males, young white males? Oh, here's one. How about the Orlando nightclub shooting? I don't know. Fort Hood, maybe. He looks a little closer to being white. Then there's San Bernardino. San Bernardino shooters, yeah, they definitely look like, well, at least one of them looks like a young white male. And I don't want to make any assumptions about the gender identity of the other individual. Now, this clearly, the Naval Shipyard, this guy clearly and obviously, he's clearly and obviously is a white guy, right? I mean, he looks white to me. I could be wrong, or maybe it's the white walls that I'm mistaking. Look, the fact is that they're spouting once again the same common nonsense. First of all, understand that most mass shooters are not young. They may be white. They may tend to be for some of these white males, but most of them are not young. The interesting thing about a lot of this stuff and just the perpetuation of the misinformation and the lies, and yet if you challenge them, as the one young man did, you're shouted down. And that is the method that they utilize in order to not be able to allow people to participate in a dialogue. You can see that these young kids have been appropriately trained.
For arming hate in our country. If we had more armed guards in our school, again, it would perpetuate the school to prison pipeline. We have to be cognizant.
And how would it do that? Just help me understand the logic.
Because,
if you're treated like a criminal, you're going to act like a criminal.
Exactly. And this mindset, the way that we are socialized in schools as being seen as criminals, as being black bodies, then that is going to contribute to your way of life.
I'm not white, I'm not black, but I am a person of color. And I don't feel comfortable. I'm walking around and I'm looking at these cops and I'm like, do they think I'm up to something because of the color of my skin? And that's how all of my friends that are black in my school feel. And I don't receive the same airtime as some of my friends, and it is because I'm not white.
So, the funny part about the funny part about this whole thing is I'm looking at this and you're like, so their whole goal, they say, is they say they want to be safer in school. But if you want to be safer in school, well, why not have people at school who can, I don't know, defend you? You know, this whole it'll add for the school to prison pipeline. Where I went to high school, we had armed security. The thing is, and by the way, there are people who work in buildings all the time, work in professional buildings all the time. And guess what? They have armed security. And those armed security do not feel like criminals. Every Capitol building that I walk into has armed security. You know, if you feel like a criminal because there happen to be armed security there, well, then you know what? The problem is not that there are armed security. It's a you problem. The problem is you. The problem is how you are perceived. They are so right. This is a cultural problem. And this is a problem in terms of the ways in which we are raising our children.
Let me say something. When you have 20% of a population, the entire United States population, committing 50% of the homicides, that's not just you are the victims. That's also your part of the issue. When you have 20% of a race committing 50% of the violent crimes, that's no longer okay, well, now I'm being affected. That's also playing into culture.
You just proved my point. Structural racism is this vertical violence that affects the violence that we see in urban cities, that disproportionately affects women of color, transgender people of color, and people of color in general.
Okay, so first of all, let us just be real clear. A lot of this violence, in particular gun violence, affects black males. I mean, I found it interesting that she went to women of color, she went to transgendered of color, and then, oh, by the way, yeah, the highest group of people that are both shooting and being shot, yeah, we're going to mention them last. There's been no social engineering there. But let's talk about that. Let's talk about let's get back to the conversation about the underlying causes. Let's talk about fatherlessness. The fact that 70% of these young black men that she is talking about are going to grow up in a household without a father. And chances are when they go to school, guess what? They're not going to have any male role models there either. not at elementary school, not by the time they get to high school. These are men who are growing up without fathers, without significant male role models in their life, and we wonder why they don't value life, why they have some of the issues that they are having. But you don't want to talk about that. No, that doesn't because see, that doesn't involve taking people's guns. So therefore we can't talk about that. We can't talk about the fact that, and forgive the young man, I appreciated the spirit of his statistics, but we're talking about 10% of the population is involved in an overwhelming percentage of all of the gun violence. Well, guess what? That's also because it happens to be drug and gang related. But we didn't talk about guns. I mean, we didn't talk about drugs and gangs. They didn't talk about that in this discussion. They don't want to get into that because, well, that takes the emphasis away from banning guns. But see, they claim that is not their goal. Even though they do all of this stuff and they implement all of the same tools that their liberal parents or whatever you want to call them, the liberal generation before them utilize even today, the establishment that they seem to follow, they say that it's not about taking guns.
You guys are using tactics like race and things of that sort to try to grab guns from people that rightfully can own them.
But who's saying grab guns?
We're not trying to get rid of guns. We just wanted to make it harder for someone that's going to shoot up a school to get it.
Okay, so there were laws in place in Parkland, Florida, that would have kept an individual that I think a number of people, there's enough media reports for me to feel comfortable saying there were a number of people who believed that he was capable of shooting up a school. And yet they did absolutely nothing. There were a number of people, there were a number of red flags when it came to the Orlando shooter. And yet he still was able to get a gun. There were laws in place that would have kept him from being able to do that. Someone failed, government failed, and guess what? Still got a gun. Then there was the Texas shooter. He was convicted of domestic violence, and once again, he got a gun. The point that some of these I think well-meaning young people fail to understand is that once again you keep going back and you keep blaming the tool. You think that if you don't put armed guards at school that you'll be safer, that somehow having armed guards will attract violence. The violence is going to come whether they're there or not. Well, let me clarify. It is less likely to appear if they are in fact there. Thus, the fact that 98% of all mass shootings occur in gun-free zones. Well, guess what? How about we put some people there with guns? Your goal is to disarm people. And you think that because people will not be able to own guns legally, then, well, hey, they'll be okay. Guess what? Hasn't worked out real well for Chicago. Hasn't worked out real well for Brazil, has it? The murder capital of the world, where 60,000, a nation that is 2/3 the size of the United States, has over 60,000, 6 times more murders with firearms than does the United States. But they don't want to talk about that because those are the real inconvenient truth. You know, there were 2 young men here who were really standing up and really kind of holding their own. I almost feel sorry for the lone white males in this particular debate, because you know what? They were shouted down throughout the entire discussion when they brought up very salient points. And when you have to tackle the issue of race, and this is the worst part, the hardest part is being able to have a conversation about race. Because guess what? People who are the race baiters in this world, they don't really want to have a conversation. They want to tell white people that you are evil because you are white. Well, guess what? That's why you lost the White House. Because many people who believe in a lot of the things that you do, many white males got tired of listening to you tell them that they were evil simply because they were white males. They got tired of listening to you tell them that everything is wrong with this world is because of them, the white males. You know what? Things that are wrong in this country are wrong because we can't have an open and honest dialogue. We obviously can't have an open and honest dialogue about race. We can't have an open and honest dialogue about corruption in government and corruption in the mainstream media and the clear and obvious bias that they have. And most importantly to me, as a part of this conversation, we clearly cannot have an open and honest discussion about guns because one side is willfully ignorant on the issue. They don't understand guns. They don't understand gun policy. And they don't care to because they want to use emotions, right? They realize that they can't appeal to logic because the facts are not on their side. So they appeal to emotions. They start off by looking for instances like what happened in Parkland or Vegas or in Sutherland, Texas, right? And when that isn't enough, then they start doing things like calling people baby killers and saying you don't care about children. Forget the fact that they oversee and promote an industry that, has killed more children than all other causes of death for children combined and tripled. Yeah, I'm talking about the abortion industry. So you don't have, this is not a pro-choice, pro-life debate, but you get my point. Right? They don't want to talk about the real truth. They don't want to talk about the facts. They want to talk about racism. They want to play the race card because they know that one of the easiest ways to get my fairer-skinned brethren thrown off the track is to start talking about race and start calling people racist. Well, you know what? These two young men held their own. And I appreciate them standing up and having the conversation that they did. Because here's the thing. They're right. We do need to have an open discussion. We do need to have a conversation about it. But if we're going to have that conversation, y'all better be ready. Because the truth ain't easy. But guess what? The truth shall set you free. I know some of y'all don't want to be free. Anyway, folks, that's going to be it for today's Coffee with Craig. I appreciate you guys tuning in. I appreciate you mostly, well, not mostly, but a lot for liking and sharing these videos, telling your friends about the Firearms Policy Coalition. We are the home in the fight for civil rights. Got to use them or you're going to lose them. You guys take care.
If you like our videos, follow, subscribe, like, and share.